Hello, I'm Logan,
And I'm Luke.
and we're doing an in-depth analysis of football statistics to create fantasy football projections for some of the best football players in the game. If you don't know what fantasy football is, we'll try to explain as clearly as we can. The first step is to fantasy football is the draft, where you take turns picking the players who you think will perform best during the season. Once you are done with the draft, you have a fantasy football team that consists of players of all offensive positions, as you can see. Once you have your team, you play other people in the league based off a point system that applies to these players. For example, a running back, wide receiver, or tight end gets 1 point for every 10 yards that is caught or ran, 6 points for every touchdown, and a half a point for every catch. Now that's just an example of the point system, and it goes further in depth with different players. How these players perform in a game translates to fantasy points that accumulate for a team score, as you can see in this game.
This is ESPN's Fantasy Edition. Week 11 is on our tails, which means we will project the production of 4 players that were chosen by ESPN fans like you. This week, our players will be quarterback Drew Brees of the New Orleans Saints, running back Adrian Peterson of the Minnesota Vikings, wide receiver A.J. Green of the Cincinnati Bengals, and tight end Jimmy Grant, also of the Saints. The first player we will be analyzing is Drew Brees.
Alright, the first step to finding a projection or making a projection is to find what the averages say Drew Brees will do against the San Francisco defense. So, we took the total season statistics of both Drew Brees and San Francisco defense and divided them by how many games they have played to get a per game average. Now, we will average both of their per game averages to get an average production of Drew Brees versus San Francisco defense. That's a lot of averages. Then, we run these stats through the point system and we get 21 points. But that can't be a final projection because there are many other things that go into making a prediction for a certain player. So now we have to include the variables that go with football and the statistical patterns. The first variable or X factor that we have is that the Saints are at home. And the Saints are an incredible team when they are at home. Next, San Francisco lost their last game, so they don't have much momentum going forward. New Orleans' great defense can force turnovers against San Francisco's average offense, and because of this, Drew Brees will have more opportunities to score and to thrive. Next, New Orleans is coming off a huge offensive win against the Dallas Cowboys, and they have way more momentum than San Francisco does, and Drew Brees can pull some pretty big moves off. Also, Drew Brees has been averaging about 42 passes in the past 4 games, and is averaging 353 passing yards between that span. San Francisco has allowed 0 touchdowns in the past 2 games. Now, with all of these good things said about Drew Brees, this is something that goes for San Francisco that might go into account in how many touchdowns we say Drew Brees will throw. Now that we have the variables into account, we now make our final projections. Even though Drew Brees averages 2 touchdowns a game, we gave him 1 because we saw that San Francisco defense has allowed 0 touchdowns to quarterbacks in the past 2 games. We gave him 1 interception because that's what he averages, and as you can see, this is exactly what Brees did in reality. Now, for yards, I took the 343 yards he's been averaging for the past 4 weeks, which was one of our variables, and averaged it with the average yards that San Francisco allows to get 314 yards, which was only 9 yards off of what he actually got. As you can see, we were much closer to his actual stats than the fantasy experts, as we were only 1.5 points off and they were 10 points off.
Next, we have Adrian Peterson of the Minnesota Vikings. As you can see, we did the averages first, but we'll pay less attention to those because this is the best running back versus the best defense in the league. So both of them are most likely going to do much different than how they've done in the past. Instead, we'll look at some patterns. First off, Seattle allowed only 49 yards last game to a similar running back like Adrian Peterson. Also, Seattle is at home, and Seattle's defense is almost unstoppable when it's at home, which might cause trouble for Adrian Peterson. Next, Adrian Peterson ran for 75 yards last game, and this gives us a recent statistic, which is very important. Now, one of the most important ones is that Seattle's defense has allowed 0 touchdowns in the past 3 weeks to running backs, which means Adrian Peterson might not be able to score. Now that we found patterns, we were able to make accurate projections. For touchdowns, we gave him 0 because Seattle hasn't allowed 1 in 3 weeks. In reality, he didn't score 1. Now for yards, we took the 49 that Seattle allowed last week and the 75 that AP ran for last week and averaged them together to get 62 yards, which was 3 yards off of what he actually got. That's pretty accurate. As you can see, our projections were significantly better than the experts as we were 1.4 points off and they were 23.4 off. Lastly, we have AJ Green of the Bengals. Since the player covering AJ is the best in the league, and AJ is one of the best, this is another odd matchup, which means we'll pay less attention to the averages. First of all, AJ is going against Joe Hayden, who is one of the best defenders in the game. Last time he went against Hayden, he only got 51 yards and didn't score a touchdown. Pretty much what we found is that the Bengals don't do well against this team, which might make it hard for AJ Green to produce. In our final projections, we gave Green 42 yards by averaging his 51 that he got last time he played them, and the 34 that Joe Hayden gives up on average to receivers. We predicted 0 touchdowns for Green because of the Bengals' unproductiveness against the opposing team. Our projections were once again much more accurate as we were 4 points off and the experts were 17.5 off.
Now, Jimmy Graham of the Saints. Once again, we are going to pay less attention to these averages because Jimmy Graham has been injured for a couple of weeks and is still a little beat up, so you can't expect them to perform like he did before. We'll look at the patterns in his statistics to figure it out. First off, Jimmy has a lingering injury, so he probably won't play to his full potential. Also, Jimmy had his worst game last week, only receiving 59 yards. This might be Jimmy's hardest matchup because San Francisco is ranked 3rd against tight ends. Now for our final projection, we said that Jimmy would not score a touchdown because all of these negative variables that we put in. We predicted 48 yards by averaging the 59 yards that he got last week and the 37 that San Francisco allows on average. And for receptions, we gave him 5 because that's what he averages. This was possibly our most accurate prediction, as we were only 1 catch and only 7 yards off of what he actually got. We were only 0.2 points off, while the experts were 14.4 points off.
So fantasy fans, these are your 4 player projections for the week, and we hope that they help. I'm Luke Garcia.
And I'm Logan Cook.
See you next time on ESPN Fantasy Edition.